I'd been driving the same stretch of Highway 87 for 8 months now, and I still wasn't used to how empty it felt out here. 30 miles from the nearest town, nothing but Montana grassland rolling away in every direction until it hit the mountains. Most nights, I'd see maybe 3 cars the whole drive to work. Tonight wasn't any different. The headlights picked up the familiar blue and white sign first. Rowan's Roadside Diner, open 24 hours. Then the building itself came into view, a long rectangle of yellow light sitting by itself in all that darkness. I pulled into the gravel lot and parked next to Ethel's Honda. Brian's truck was already gone, which meant the evening shift had ended right on time. I sat in my car for a minute before getting out. Not because I was dreading work exactly. The job was fine. Better than fine, really. After everything that happened back in Billings, I needed something simple. Something that didn't require me to make decisions that could ruin people's lives. Slinging coffee and burgers to truckers and late-night travelers was about as simple as it got. But this place had its own complications. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in. Ethel looked up from behind the counter where she was counting the register. She was 28, maybe 5 years younger than me. With long black hair she always kept in a ponytail during her shift. She'd been working here for 3 years, which made her practically a veteran. "Hey, Caleb," she said. "Quiet night so far. Had maybe a dozen customers since 6. That's good?" I hung my jacket on the hook by the kitchen door and grabbed my apron from underneath the counter. "Brian get out all right?" "Yeah, left about 10 minutes ago. Said to tell you he restocked the coffee filters and cleaned the grill." She finished with the register and closed the drawer. "Oh, and we're low on pie, just apple and cherry left." I nodded and started my usual routine. Check the coffee pots, make sure they were full and hot, wipe down the counter, count the clean mugs. It was all standard diner stuff, the kind of work I could do without thinking about it, which was exactly what I needed these days. Ethel gathered her purse and keys from under the register. "You remember the rules, right?" "I remember." She studied my face for a second, like she was trying to decide if I really meant it. "I know they sound crazy, but they're important, Caleb, especially out here." "I know." I did know. It had taken me a while to figure that out, but I knew now. See, on my first day, Rowan had handed me a piece of paper. Notebook paper. The kind with the blue lines, written in pencil in his careful handwriting. 5 rules, numbered 1 through 5. 1. Always acknowledge the regulars, especially the old man with the translucent skin. 2. If you see a man with deer eyes, go to the back room and stay there until he leaves. 3. If a woman in a blue dress comes in, close the diner immediately and go home. 4. Never work the last shift of the month alone. 5. If a child comes in after midnight, ignore them completely. Do not speak to them. Do not serve them. Do not acknowledge them in any way. I'd read it twice, then looked up at Rowan. He was 58, built like someone who'd spent most of his life doing physical work. Gray hair, deep-set blue eyes, and a face that didn't give much away. "This is a joke, right?" I'd asked. "No joke," he'd said. "Follow those rules, and you'll be fine. Don't follow them, and you won't be working here long." I'd figured he meant I'd get fired. It took me a few weeks to realize he might have meant something else entirely. The first couple of months, I thought maybe Rowan was just eccentric. The kind of guy who'd been running a roadside diner for so long that he'd developed some weird superstitions. Ethel and Brian seemed to take the rules seriously, but I figured they were just playing along to keep the boss happy. Then I met the old man. It was my 3rd week on the job. Late Tuesday night, maybe 2 in the morning. I was restocking the napkin dispensers when I heard the door chime. I looked up and saw him walking in. He was tall, probably 6 feet or so, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive. His hair was white and perfectly combed. But his skin was wrong, not just pale, translucent. I could see the blue lines of veins running underneath it, like looking at someone through frosted glass. And his teeth. When he smiled at me, I saw they were too sharp. All of them. Not just the canines, but every single tooth in his mouth came to a point. I stood there holding a stack of napkins, trying to process what I was seeing. My brain kept insisting that what I was looking at wasn't possible. People didn't have skin like that. People didn't have teeth like that. But there he was. He took a seat at the counter, 3 stools down from where I was standing. He folded his hands in front of him and looked at me expectantly. I remembered the first rule. Always acknowledge the regulars, especially the old man with the translucent skin. "Good evening," I said. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. "What can I get for you?" "Coffee, please," he said. His voice was perfectly normal, pleasant even. "Black." I poured him a cup from the pot behind the counter. My hands were shaking a little, but I managed not to spill any. I set the cup down in front of him, along with a small spoon and some sugar packets, even though he'd said he wanted it black. "Thank you," he said. He drank the coffee slowly, taking small sips. He didn't say anything else, and I didn't try to make conversation. I just went back to restocking napkins, stealing glances at him every few seconds. When he finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out exact change, $1.50, which was exactly what coffee cost. He placed the money on the counter next to his empty cup. "Have a good evening," he said. "You too," I managed. He walked out the same way he'd come in, calm, unhurried. The bell chimed again when the door closed behind him. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, staring at the empty cup and the money he'd left, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, that the late hour and the isolation had made me see things that weren't there. But the cup was real. The money was real. And when I picked up the cup to wash it, it was still warm. The next morning, when Ethel came in for her shift, I told her what had happened. I described the man in detail, expecting her to tell me I was losing my mind. Instead, she nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. "That's Mr. Henley," she said. "He comes in twice a week, usually Tuesday and Friday nights. Always orders black coffee, always leaves exact change. His skin," I said, "and his teeth. I know. He's been coming here for as long as I've worked here. Rowan says he was coming here before that too." "What is he?" Ethel shrugged. "I don't know. Rowan's never said and I've never asked, but he's never caused any trouble. As long as you acknowledge him and serve him politely, he just drinks his coffee and leaves." "And if you don't acknowledge him?" Her expression got serious. "I don't know, and I don't want to find out." That was when I realized the rules weren't jokes. They weren't superstitions or eccentric quirks. They were survival instructions. I'd been following them carefully ever since. Now, 8 months later, I'd seen Mr. Henley maybe 60 times. He still made my skin crawl, but I'd gotten used to the routine. Coffee, black, exact change. Polite conversation if he initiated it, but he usually didn't. I'd never seen the man with deer eyes or the woman in the blue dress. I'd made sure never to work the last shift of the month alone, and I'd never had to deal with a child after midnight. I was hoping to keep it that way. Ethel finished gathering her things and headed for the door. "See you tomorrow, Caleb." "Drive safe." The bell chimed when she left, and then I was alone in the diner. Just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the sound of the coffee pots bubbling behind the counter. I finished my opening routine and settled in for what I hoped would be a quiet night. Maybe a few truckers would stop by for coffee and pie. Maybe a family driving through would want burgers and fries. Normal people, ordering normal food, paying with normal money. That's all I wanted these days. Normal. But working at Rowan's roadside diner, 30 miles from anywhere, I was starting to think normal might be too much to ask for. I poured myself a cup of coffee and checked the clock. 2:17 in the morning. 7.5 hours until my shift ended. I could handle that. I'd been handling it for 8 months now. The rules would keep me safe. They always had before. I was wiping down the corner booth when I caught movement outside the front windows. Someone walking across the gravel lot, heading for the entrance. I couldn't see much through the glass, just a dark shape moving under the parking lot lights. Normal enough. Truckers showed up at all hours, and it wasn't even 3 in the morning yet. Still early by diner standards. I kept working the rag across the table, watching out of the corner of my eye. The figure moved closer to the door, and I could make out more details. Tall guy, maybe 6 feet, wearing what looked like a heavy coat. Walking kind of slow, like he was tired from driving. Nothing unusual about that either. Most people who stopped here this time of night had been on the road for hours. They moved like their joints had stiffened up from sitting behind the wheel too long. I finished with the booth and moved to the next table. The coffee pot felt warm in my other hand. I'd been carrying it around while I cleaned, planning to top off any customers who came in. Basic hospitality stuff. Keep them happy, get a decent tip, make the night go by faster. The footsteps on the gravel got closer. Heavy boots, from the sound of it. Work boots, probably. Most of our late-night customers were working people. Truckers, shift workers heading home, guys who did construction or ranch work and got up before dawn. I glanced toward the door again. The man had reached the entrance but hadn't come in yet. He was standing there, maybe checking his phone or fishing for his wallet. People did that sometimes, making sure they had cash before they committed to stopping. I went back to wiping tables. Give him a minute to decide what he wanted to do. No point in staring at potential customers through the window. That just made people uncomfortable. The bell above the door would ring when he came in. Then I'd do the usual routine. Grab a menu, ask if he wanted coffee, let him settle into a booth or at the counter. Simple stuff. The kind of normal interaction I'd been hoping for all night. But something made me look up again. Maybe it was the way the footsteps had stopped, or maybe just instinct. The man was still outside, but now he was turning toward the door, getting ready to push it open. That's when I saw his face. The coffee pot slipped out of my hand before my brain even processed what I was looking at. It hit the floor and shattered, sending hot coffee in glass pieces across the tiles. But I barely heard the crash. The man's face was wrong. Human enough from a distance, but up close, those weren't human eyes looking through the glass. They were huge and brown and round, taking up way too much space on either side of his nose. Deer eyes. Exactly like Rowan had described in rule number 2. My body moved before my mind caught up. I was already running toward the back of the diner, my feet slipping on the spilled coffee. The kitchen door swung open under my shoulder and I kept going, past the grill and the prep tables, straight for the walk-in freezer. Rule number 2. If you see a man with deer eyes, go to the back room until he leaves. Rowan had been specific about that. Don't try to serve him, don't try to talk to him. Just get out of sight and wait. I yanked the freezer door open and threw myself inside, pulling it shut behind me. The heavy latch clicked into place, sealing me into the cold darkness. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The temperature in here had to be close to 0, and I was wearing just my work shirt and apron. But that seemed like the least of my problems right now. I'd seen those eyes. There was no mistaking what they were. Not human eyes that looked strange in the light, not some trick of the glass or my tired brain playing games. Deer eyes, large and dark and completely wrong on a human face. The cold bit into my skin, but I didn't move toward the door. Rule number 2 said stay in the back room until he leaves. It didn't specify which back room, but the freezer felt like the safest option. Solid walls, heavy door, no windows. If something was going to happen out there, I didn't want to see it. I pressed my back against the metal shelving and tried to listen. The freezer's compressor was running, making it hard to hear anything from the dining room. But underneath that steady hum, I thought I could make out other sounds. Footsteps, maybe. The bell above the front door. He'd come inside. The man with deer eyes was in the diner right now, probably looking around for whoever had been working. Looking for me. My breath came out in white puffs. The cold was starting to work its way through my clothes, making my arms and legs ache. But I wasn't going anywhere. Rowan had made it clear that this rule wasn't optional. You see the deer-eyed man, you hide. Period. I thought about the broken coffee pot on the floor, glass everywhere, coffee spreading across the tiles. He'd know someone had been there recently. The register was still open from when I'd been counting change, and there were dirty dishes on some of the tables. Clear signs that the place was being worked. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe he didn't care about finding the staff. Maybe he just wanted to be left alone, like Mr. Henley with his black coffee and exact change. Except Rowan had never told me to hide from Mr. Henley. Rule number 1 said to acknowledge him, serve him, treat him like any other customer. Rule number 2 was different. Rule number 2 said run. More sounds from outside the freezer, something that might have been chairs being moved around, or maybe stools. The counter had 4 stools, metal ones with padded seats that spun if you push them. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep warm. The cold was getting serious now, working its way through my shirt and into my bones. How long was I supposed to wait? Rule number 2 didn't give a time limit, just said to stay until he leaves. But how would I know when he left? The freezer door was too thick to hear the bell above the front entrance. I could be in here for hours, slowly freezing to death while the diner sat empty. That was a problem for later. Right now, the important thing was following the rule. Rowan had written these instructions for a reason. He'd seen what happened when people didn't follow them. I thought about Ethel's comment from earlier, about the diner having trouble keeping staff. How many people had worked here before me? How many had quit after a few weeks, or just stopped showing up one day? And how many had disappeared because they didn't follow rule number 2? The compressor shut off, leaving the freezer in relative quiet. I held my breath and listened. There were definitely sounds coming from the dining area. Not footsteps exactly, but something moving around. Something heavy. Then I heard what sounded like wood breaking. A sharp crack followed by pieces hitting the floor, then another crack and another. He was destroying something out there. Furniture, maybe, or the counter itself. I pressed myself further back against the shelving, even though there was nowhere else to go. The metal was so cold it burned through my shirt, but I didn't care. Whatever was happening in the dining room, I didn't want any part of it. More breaking sounds. Rhythmic now, like someone working their way through a list. Crack, crash, crack, crash. Methodical destruction. The cold was making it hard to think straight. My fingers were going numb, and I could feel the beginnings of serious shivering. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until I was sure he was gone. I tried to remember everything Rowan had told me about the rules. Most of the conversation had focused on Mr. Henley, since he was the most common visitor. But Rowan had mentioned the others too, briefly. The woman in the blue dress meant close the diner and go home. The child after midnight should be ignored completely. And the man with deer eyes, hide until he leaves. Rowan had said something else, though. Something about previous employees. People who hadn't followed the rules correctly. They'd disappeared. Not quit, not moved away, not found other jobs. Disappeared. Which could mean a lot of things, but none of them were good. The breaking sounds stopped. The diner went quiet except for the hum of the main refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights. I waited, counted to 60, then did it again. The silence stretched out, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. He could still be out there, just standing still, waiting. My whole body was shaking now from the cold. I had to make a decision soon, or hypothermia was going to make it for me. But rule number 2 said stay until he leaves. It didn't say anything about freezing to death in the process. I listened for another few minutes. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no sounds of destruction. Just the normal background noise of the diner's equipment. Maybe he was gone. Maybe the silence meant it was safe to come out. Or maybe it meant he was waiting right outside the freezer door. I counted to 60 again, then made my choice. I couldn't stay in here much longer without risking serious damage from the cold. And if he was still out there, well, at least I'd followed the rule as long as I could. I reached for the door handle, my numb fingers barely able to grip the metal. The latch released with a soft click, and I pushed the door open just a crack. Warm air rushed in, feeling like a blast from a furnace after the freezer's cold. I waited, listening. Still nothing. I opened the door wider and stepped out into the kitchen. My legs were stiff and shaky, and I had to grab the prep table to keep from falling. But I was alive, and the kitchen looked normal. No signs of disturbance. I made my way toward the dining room, moving slowly and trying not to make noise. The swinging door was still closed. I put my ear against it and listened. Silence. I pushed the door open just enough to see through the gap. The dining room was empty. No sign of the man with deer eyes, but 3 of the counter stools were broken in half, their metal frames twisted and their padded seats torn apart. Pieces of stuffing and vinyl were scattered across the floor, mixed with the glass and coffee from the pot I'd dropped. He was gone. Whatever he'd wanted, whatever he'd been doing, it was over. I stepped into the dining room and looked around. The damage was limited to the stools. Everything else looked untouched. The booths, the tables, the register, all normal. Just those 3 stools, destroyed with what must have been incredible force. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rowan's number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. Yeah? His voice was groggy but alert, like he'd been expecting a call. It's Caleb. I had a visitor tonight, the one from rule number 2. Silence on the other end. Then, you followed the rule? Yeah. Hid in the walk-in freezer until he left, but he broke 3 of the counter stools. You're okay? Cold as hell, but okay. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Good. You did the right thing. The stools can be replaced. How often does this happen? Not often. Maybe once or twice a year, usually during storms, but not always. I looked around the dining room again. Previous employees who didn't hide fast enough? Disappeared, Rowan said simply. Never found any trace of them. That explained why the diner had trouble keeping staff. It also explained why Rowan had been so serious about the rules on my first day. I'll be in tomorrow to clean up, Rowan continued, and to order new stools. You can finish your shift if you want, or close early. Your call. I thought about it. The idea of staying here alone for another 5 hours didn't sound appealing, but I also didn't want to seem weak. I'd followed the rules and survived. That had to count for something. I'll stay, I said, but I'm keeping the kitchen door propped open so I can hear better. Smart. And Caleb, you did good tonight. Not everyone follows the rules when it matters. He hung up, leaving me alone in the damaged dining room. I looked at the broken stools again, wondering what kind of strength it took to snap metal like that. Then I went to get the broom and dustpan. No point in leaving the mess for the morning shift. As I swept up the pieces, I started to understand why the diner went through so many employees. Normal people weren't built for this kind of work. I'd swept up most of the glass and stuffing when I heard Brian's voice from the kitchen. Hey Caleb, you back there? Yeah, I called out. Just finishing up. I dumped the last of the debris into the trash bag and carried it to the dumpster out back. When I came through the kitchen door, Brian was standing by the prep station looking at the broken stools. Jesus, he said. What happened here? I'd forgotten Brian was coming in early today. He usually showed up around 6:30 to start breakfast prep. but the clock on the wall read 6:15. Must have wanted to get a jump on things. "Had a visitor," I said. "Rule number 2. Brian's face went pale. He'd been working here almost as long as Ethel, so he knew what that meant. He looked toward the front windows, then back at the destroyed furniture. "You okay?" "Yeah. Followed the rules. Stayed in the freezer till he left." "Good. That's good." Brian wiped his hands on his apron even though they were already clean. "Rowan know?" "Called him right after. He's coming in later to order new stools." Brian nodded but kept staring at the mess. I could see him working through it in his head, probably wondering what kind of strength it took to twist metal like that. Same thing I'd been thinking. I went back to the kitchen to start a fresh pot of coffee. The breakfast crowd would be here soon, and I needed to get things back to normal. Brian followed me, moving slower than usual. "You sure you're all right?" he asked. "Just cold. Spent about 20 minutes in the freezer." 20 minutes? Brian's voice went up a notch. "Christ, Caleb. You could have gotten hypothermia. Better than the alternative." He didn't argue with that. I was measuring coffee grounds when I heard it. A soft sound from the dining room, like someone clearing their throat. Brian heard it too. He stopped moving, his hand frozen halfway to the grill controls. "Customer," he whispered. I hadn't heard the door chime, but sometimes the bell stuck, especially when the weather changed. I moved toward the service window and looked out into the dining room. There was a woman standing by the front door. She wore a blue dress, the old-fashioned kind with long sleeves and a high collar. The fabric looked heavy, like wool or thick cotton. Her hair was dark, pinned up in a style I'd seen in old photographs. She stood perfectly still with her back to us, facing the front windows. My stomach dropped. Rule number 3. If a woman in blue dress enters, close diner and go home. But I couldn't move. Something about her posture, the way she held herself so perfectly straight, made my skin crawl. She wasn't looking around like a normal customer would. Wasn't checking out the menu board or looking for a place to sit. Just standing there, motionless. Behind me, Brian made a sharp sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a word. When I glanced back at him, his face had gone white. His eyes were fixed on the woman, and he looked like he'd stopped breathing. "Brian," I whispered. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. It was like he'd been frozen solid. The woman started to turn. I only caught a glimpse of her profile before I grabbed Brian's arm and yanked him toward the back door. His body moved like dead weight, no resistance but no help either. I had to half-drag him across the kitchen. "Come on," I hissed. "We have to go, now." I shoved the back door open and pulled Brian outside into the cold morning air. He stumbled, nearly fell, but I kept pulling him toward my truck. The gravel crunched under our feet, loud in the silence. "Brian, move." That seemed to snap him out of it. He blinked, looked around like he was waking up from a dream, then started running on his own. We reached my truck and I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try. I threw it in reverse and gunned it out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind us. In the rearview mirror, I could see the diner getting smaller, but I didn't slow down until we'd gone at least 2 miles down the highway. I pulled over at a scenic overlook and cut the engine. Both of us sat there breathing hard, staring back toward where we'd come from. The diner was just a small shape in the distance now. "Is she gone?" Brian's voice came out as a croak. I squinted at the building. From this far away, I couldn't make out any details. No way to tell if anyone was inside or not. "Can't see from here." "What was that?" Brian was shaking, not just his hands, his whole body. What the hell was that thing? Rule number 3. I know what rule it was, but what was she? What did she want? I didn't have an answer for that. Rowan had never explained what any of them were, just what to do if we saw them. And right now, sitting in my truck 2 miles away from the diner. I was grateful for that. Some things were better left unknown. "She was looking at me," Brian said. When she started to turn around, I could feel her looking at me, like she was trying to get inside my head. But she didn't. We got out in time. Did we? Brian wiped his face with his sleeve. How do you know? How do you know she's not still there, waiting for us to come back? That was a good question. Rule number 3 said to close the diner and go home, but it didn't say anything about what happened after. How long were we supposed to stay away? An hour? A day? The rest of our lives? "I'll call Rowan," I said. But when I reached for my phone, I realized I'd left it on the counter back at the diner. Brian checked his pockets and came up empty too. Shit. We sat there for another 10 minutes, watching the diner. No movement that I could see. No cars in the lot except Brian's truck, which we'd left behind in our rush to get out. "I can't go back there," Brian said finally. "We have to, eventually." "No, I mean I can't go back there, ever." He looked at me, and his eyes were different somehow, older. "I'm done, Caleb. I'm quitting." I wanted to argue with him, tell him he was overreacting, but I remembered the way he'd frozen up when he saw her, the way his whole body had gone rigid, like something had taken control of him. If I hadn't been there to pull him out. "What about your shift?" I asked. "Find someone else. I'll work through the end of the week if Rowan needs time to hire a replacement, but I'm not doing any more night shifts. And I'm not working alone." I understood. Hell, part of me wanted to quit too. 8 months of this job, and I'd never felt anything like what happened back there. The deer-eyed man had been scary, sure, but this was different. The woman hadn't even looked at us directly, and Brian had nearly been paralyzed. "Let's wait another few minutes," I said. "Then we'll drive by, see if the coast is clear." Brian nodded, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it. He'd already made up his mind. When we finally drove back to the diner, the parking lot was empty. No sign of the woman in blue. The front door stood open, which was strange. I always kept it locked when we weren't serving customers. "Stay in the truck," I told Brian. "You're not going in there alone." "Someone has to check." Then we both go. We walked to the entrance together, moving slow and careful. The dining room looked normal, except for the broken stools I still hadn't finished cleaning up. No sign that anyone had been inside, but something felt different. The air was colder, and there was a smell I couldn't identify. Not unpleasant, exactly, but wrong, like flowers that had been dead too long. "She's gone," I said. Brian didn't look convinced. He kept glancing over his shoulder, checking the corners of the room like she might materialize out of nowhere. We made it through the rest of the morning shift without talking much. Brian cooked breakfast for the handful of truckers and early commuters who stopped by, but his heart wasn't in it. He jumped every time the door chime rang, and I caught him staring out the front windows more than once. When Rowan showed up around 10, Brian didn't even wait for him to get through the door. "I'm quitting," he said. Rowan looked at the broken stools, then at Brian's face, then at me. "Rule number 3, he asked. "This morning around 6:15. Rowan nodded like he'd been expecting this. "You followed protocol?" "Yeah, got out fast as we could." "Good." He turned to Brian. "You sure about quitting?" "Positive." "All right, work through Friday if you can. I'll need time to find someone new." Brian agreed to that, but I could tell he was already gone in his head. He'd made his decision the moment he saw that woman, and nothing was going to change his mind. After Brian left for the day, Rowan and I sat at the counter drinking coffee. He'd already called about replacement stools, and the supplier promised to have them delivered by Wednesday. "The woman in blue," I said. "What is she?" Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "Most dangerous one we get. Shows up maybe once every 2 years, sometimes longer. Always during day shift, always when there's more than one person working. Why? Don't know. But I do know what happens to people who don't follow rule number 3. He looked at me. They disappear. Not like the deer-eyed man, where we just find empty clothes. They vanish completely. No trace, no body, no nothing. Like they never existed at all. That explained Brian's reaction. Some part of him had known, even before his conscious mind caught up, that he was in serious danger. How many employees have you lost? I asked. Over the years, more than I like to count. Rowan finished his coffee and stood up. But you did good today. Both of you. Following the rules when it matters, that's what keeps people alive. After he left, I sat alone in the diner thinking about what he'd said. Brian was quitting, which meant we were down to 3 people total. Me, Ethel, and Rowan. Rule number 4 said never work the last shift of the month alone. But with only 3 of us, that was going to be hard to manage. I looked around the empty dining room, at the space where the broken stools used to be, and wondered how long it would be before we lost someone else. I'd been working alone for 3 hours when the door chime rang at 3:15 in the morning. The sound made me look up from the inventory sheet I'd been working on. Coffee supplies, napkins, sugar packets, all the mundane stuff that kept the diner running. I'd been grateful for the paperwork, honestly. Gave me something to focus on besides the empty dining room and the 3 new stools Rowan had installed yesterday to replace the ones that got destroyed. A kid stood in the doorway. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, maybe 8 at the most. Short brown hair, jeans that looked too big for him, sneakers with cartoon characters on the sides. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, the kind kids carry to school, bright blue with reflective strips. The backpack looked heavy, pulling his small frame to one side. My first instinct was to ask him what he was doing out here, alone at this hour. Where were his parents? How had he gotten to the middle of nowhere? The nearest town was 30 miles away, and there wasn't anything else out here except empty highway and grassland. But then I remembered the rules. Rule number 5. If a child comes after midnight, ignore them completely. I forced myself to look back down at the inventory sheet. Coffee filters, check. Sugar packets, we were running low. I made a note on the paper, my handwriting shakier than usual. The pen felt slippery in my palm. "Hello?" the kid called out. His voice was small, uncertain. Exactly what you'd expect from a lost child. I could hear the confusion in it, maybe a little fear. Every instinct I had screamed at me to look up, to help him, to ask him what was wrong and how I could fix it. I kept my eyes on the paper, counted sugar packets again even though I'd already written down the number. Can someone help me? The words hit me harder than they should have. I'd been a kid once too. I knew what it felt like to be scared and alone, to need an adult to make things better. This boy sounded exactly like I would have at that age. Lost, hoping someone would notice and care enough to help. But Rowan's rules had kept me alive for 8 months. The man with deer eyes had taught me that these weren't suggestions or old wives' tales. They were survival instructions, written in other people's blood. I gripped the pen tighter and moved on to the next item. Ketchup bottles, full. Mustard needed restocking. Hello? Is anybody there? I could hear him moving now, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. Small footsteps, hesitant but getting closer to the counter. Part of me wanted to peek up, just to see where he was, but I knew that would be the beginning of the end. Once I acknowledged him, once I made eye contact or spoke, I'd be breaking the rule, and I'd seen what happened when you broke the rules. The inventory sheet swam in front of my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to focus on the words I'd written. Salt and pepper shakers, check. Hot sauce, running low. Simple things, normal things, the kind of supplies that mattered in a regular diner that served regular people. I'm lost, the boy said, and his voice was closer now, maybe 10 feet away, near the counter where customers usually sat. I can't find my mom. My chest tightened. Every fiber of my being wanted to look up, to see his face, to ask him about his mother and figure out how to reunite them. It was basic human decency. It was what any normal person would do. But this wasn't a normal place, and I wasn't dealing with normal circumstances. I thought about Brian, how he'd looked when he saw the woman in blue dress, the way his body had gone rigid like something was trying to crawl inside his head, how he'd quit the next day and wouldn't even talk about what he'd felt. Some things were worse than death, and some kindnesses came with prices you couldn't afford to pay. "Please," the child said. "I just need to call my mom." The word please almost broke me. It was so small, so desperate. I could picture him standing there with his oversized backpack, probably scared out of his mind, just wanting someone to help him get home safely. I forced myself to turn the page in my inventory notebook. Started a new section. Cleaning supplies. We had plenty of dish soap. Glass cleaner was getting low. I wrote it down carefully, making sure each letter was legible. The boy was quiet for a moment, and I wondered if maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd leave on his own and find his way to wherever he was supposed to be. Maybe this would be over and I could go back to having a normal shift. "Can you hear me?" he asked. Something in his voice had changed. It was still a child's voice, still small and young, but there was something else underneath it now. An edge I couldn't quite identify. Like an echo, but not quite an echo. More like his words were coming from somewhere deeper than his throat. I kept writing. Paper towels, check. Sanitizer spray, half full. My handwriting was getting messier, the letters cramped and uneven. My hand was starting to shake. "I know you can hear me," the boy said, and now I was sure about the echo. His voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, or from somewhere far underground. "Why won't you look at me?" The temperature in the diner seemed to drop. I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms, but I didn't look up. Didn't stop writing. Toilet paper in the restrooms needed restocking. Hand soap dispensers working fine. "Look at me," the voice said. And it was definitely not just a child's voice anymore. There was something else speaking along with him. Something that made the words vibrate in ways that human vocal cords couldn't manage. "Please look at me." I gripped the pen so hard my knuckles went white. The cleaning cloth I'd been using earlier was still on the counter next to me, and I reached for it with my free hand. Started wiping down the already clean surface, focusing on making small, methodical circles. The boy, or whatever was pretending to be a boy, was moving again. I could hear those squeaky footsteps, but they sounded different now, heavier. Like each step was echoing in a space much larger than the diner's dining room. "I'm scared," he said, and the echo was getting stronger. His voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, like there were speakers hidden throughout the room all playing the same recording at slightly different speeds. "I just want to go home." I wiped the counter harder, the cloth making soft circles on the formica surface. Around and around, the same spot over and over. It gave me something to focus on besides the voice, something to anchor me to the real world where cleaning cloths and coffee stains mattered. "My mom is looking for me," the thing said. "She's probably worried." The words were getting more distorted, stretching out like they were being played on a record that was running too slow. Worried became worried, the sound dragging on for much longer than any human breath could sustain. I thought about Rowan's other rules, how specific they were, how they'd kept me alive when I followed them exactly. The old man with the translucent skin, Mr. Henley, who drank his coffee and left his exact change and never caused any trouble as long as I acknowledged him properly. The deer-eyed man who destroy. I kept wiping the same spot on the counter. My hand moved in slow circles while my mind raced through everything I knew about the rules. The child's voice had gone quiet, but I could still feel something standing there in the dining room behind me, waiting. The silence stretched out until I heard footsteps again. Not the heavy, echoing ones from before. These sounded normal. Small feet in sneakers walking across the linoleum. Then the door chime rang, and I knew the thing was gone. I sat there for another 10 minutes before I turned around. The dining room was empty. Just tables and chairs and the 3 new stools Rowan had installed. No sign anything had happened except for the inventory sheet in front of me covered in my shaky handwriting and the cleaning cloth that was damp from overuse. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I'd started to think I had this job figured out. Follow the rules exactly. Don't get creative. Don't try to help. Just do what Rowan said, and everything would be fine. Turns out I was wrong about that. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was sleeping. I'd worked the night shift and gotten home around 7, fell into bed still wearing my work clothes. The phone rang at 11:30, dragging me out of deep sleep. Caleb. Rowan's voice sounded rough, like he'd been coughing. I'm at the hospital. That woke me up fast. I sat up in bed, trying to clear my head. What happened? Pneumonia. Been fighting it for a week, but it got worse. Doctor says I'll be here at least 5 days, maybe longer. He coughed, a wet sound that made me wince. Need you and Ethel to cover everything until I get back. I did the math in my head. 2 people, 7 shifts a week. It was doable, barely. We can handle it. There's a problem. Another cough. End of the month is this Friday, Rule 4. My stomach dropped. Never worked the last shift of the month alone. I'd been at the diner for 8 months now, and Rowan had always made sure we had extra coverage for that night. Usually he worked it himself with one of us. Sometimes all 3 of us stayed. I'll take it, I said. The Friday night shift. No. His voice was firm despite the coughing. Rule says never work it alone. Not never work it if you're new, not never work it unless you're experienced. Never work it alone, period. So what do? Close early that night. Lock up at 10 and leave. Better to lose one night's business than lose an employee. I thought about that. Rowan had never closed early for anything. Even when the deer-eyed man destroyed the stools, we'd stayed open the rest of the night. Must be pretty bad. Whatever happens on the last night. Worse than the others. He was quiet for a moment. Lost 3 people to it over the years. All good employees who thought they could handle one night. All of them gone without a trace. We talked through the schedule. I'd work Monday through Thursday nights. Ethel would cover the day shifts, and Friday night until 10. Sunday we'd both work, her during the day, me at night. It would mean overtime for both of us, which was good since money was always tight. One more thing, Rowan said before hanging up. Make sure Ethel understands about Friday. She's got more experience than you, but she's also got more confidence. Sometimes that's dangerous. I called Ethel after I got off the phone with Rowan. She was at home, probably getting ready for her evening shift. I explained the situation, ran through the schedule we'd worked out. Overtime pay? She asked when I got to the part about covering extra shifts. Time and a half for anything over 40 hours. I'm in, but I want Friday night. That stopped me cold. Ethel, you heard what Rowan said. Rule 4. I heard him, but I also heard him say we're closing at 10, not working the full shift. 4 hours of overtime pay for basically a normal evening. She sounded like she'd already made up her mind. Besides, I've been here 3 years. I know how to handle the weird stuff. This isn't weird stuff. This is the thing that makes Rowan close the diner. The thing that disappeared 3 employees. And we're not working the full shift, she said again. We're leaving at 10. 2 hours before midnight. 5 hours before the really strange things start happening. It'll be fine. I tried to argue with her, but Ethel could be stubborn when she wanted something. She pointed out that she had more experience, that she knew the regulars better, that she was better at handling multiple customers during busy periods. All true, but none of it mattered if she ran into whatever happened on the last night of the month. Look, she said finally, if you're really worried, you can come in early Saturday morning. Check on me, make sure everything's okay. That seemed reasonable. How early? 5:30. That gives me time to finish closing up, but you'll be there before your normal shift starts." I agreed, but I didn't like it. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. Not supernatural wrong, just regular human wrong. Like when someone makes a decision that sounds logical, but you know it's going to cause problems. The week went smoothly enough. I covered Monday through Thursday nights without any incidents. A few truckers, some late-night travelers, Mr. Henley on Tuesday with his usual black coffee and exact change, normal diner business. Ethel worked her regular day shifts and seemed fine, not nervous about Friday, not asking questions about Rule 4. If anything, she seemed excited about the overtime money. Friday evening, I stayed until 11:30, later than usual. Ethel had arrived at 6 and was handling the dinner crowd. A family with 2 kids, a couple of truckers, an older woman traveling alone. Standard customers doing standard things. "You don't have to babysit me," Ethel said when I lingered by the coffee machine instead of leaving. "Just making sure you're set up for the evening." "I've been working here for 3 years, Caleb. I think I can handle 4 hours." She was right, but I still didn't want to leave. The diner felt different somehow. Not supernatural different, just tense. Like the air before a thunderstorm. "Remember," I said, getting my jacket from the hook by the kitchen door. 10 o'clock sharp. Lock up and go home." 10 o'clock sharp, she repeated. "Stop worrying." I drove home, but didn't sleep well. Kept thinking about Rowan's warning, about the employees who'd disappeared. Ethel was smart and experienced, but so were the others probably. Experience didn't matter if you ran into something that didn't follow normal rules. My alarm went off at 5 in the morning. I'd set it early so I could get to the diner by 5:30 like we'd agreed. The drive felt longer than usual, probably because I was anxious to make sure everything was okay. I could see Ethel's Honda in the parking lot as I pulled in. That was good, meant she was still there, still safe. But as I got closer, something felt off. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and called out, "Ethel!" No answer. The dining room looked normal. Tables and chairs in their usual spots, stools lined up at the counter, coffee pots full and warming, but empty. Completely empty. "Ethel!" I called again, louder this time. I walked around the counter, checked the kitchen. The grill was clean, dishes washed and put away. Everything neat and organized the way Ethel always left it. But no Ethel. Her purse was under the register where she always kept it. Keys, wallet, phone all inside. On the counter next to the register was a half-eaten turkey sandwich, one bite taken out of it, like she'd been eating and then suddenly stopped. I went outside and checked her car. Doors unlocked, keys in the ignition, engine cold. Her jacket was on the passenger seat. Back inside, I looked everywhere. Kitchen, dining room, bathroom, storage closet. Called her name until my voice was hoarse. Nothing. That's when I called the police. Detective Gloria Hall showed up 20 minutes later. Mid-40s, professional, the kind of cop who asked good questions and wrote everything down. I'd met her before when Brian quit after the woman in blue dress incident. She'd taken statements from both of us, filed a report that probably got buried in a stack of weird, small-town incidents. "When did you last see Miss Walker?" she asked, settling into one of the counter stools with a notepad. "Last night around 11:30. She was working the evening shift, supposed to close at 10 and go home. And you came in this morning because?" I explained about Rowan being in the hospital, about covering extra shifts, about the arrangement for me to check on Ethel early Saturday morning. Gloria wrote it all down, asked about Ethel's behavior, whether she'd seemed upset or worried about anything. "She seemed fine," I said, looking forward to the overtime pay. "Any reason she might have left voluntarily? Family emergency, personal problems?" "Her purse is still here, keys in her car, and she left food on the counter like she was interrupted in the middle of eating." Gloria looked at the half-eaten sandwich, made a note. "I'll need to check your security system." "We don't have one," She looked up from her notepad. No cameras? Rowan never saw the need. We're pretty isolated out here, don't get much trouble. That wasn't entirely true. We got plenty of trouble, just not the kind that security cameras would help with. But I couldn't explain that to a police detective. Gloria spent 2 hours going through the diner, dusted for fingerprints, took photos, bagged the sandwich as evidence. She called in Ethel's car information, checked for signs of forced entry or struggle, found nothing useful. "I'll file a missing persons report," she said finally. "Check with local hospitals, put out a BOLO alert. But honestly, without more evidence of foul play, there's not much else I can do right now." After she left, I sat at the counter staring at the spot where Ethel's sandwich had been. The diner felt wrong without her. Too quiet, too empty. She'd been here 3 years, longer than anyone except Rowan, knew all the regulars, all the weird little routines that kept the place running. And now she was gone. I thought about calling Rowan at the hospital, but what would I tell him? That his most experienced employee had vanished without a trace on the last Friday of the month? That Rule 4 had claimed another victim? He was sick enough already without me adding to his stress. Instead, I started my shift early. Made fresh coffee, wiped down tables, tried to pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't normal, and it wouldn't be normal again. The diner felt different now. Emptier, like something important had been taken away and left a hole behind. And I was the only one left to fill it. I'd been the only night shift worker for 2 weeks when Gloria Hall stopped by one last time. She came in around noon on a Thursday, ordered coffee, and sat at the counter where Ethel used to count the register. I was restocking the pie case, moving the last piece of apple to the front display, when she pulled out a thin manila folder and set it next to her cup. "Investigation's officially closed," she said. "No evidence of foul play. No signs of forced entry or struggle. No witnesses. Case goes into the inactive files." I set down the pie server and looked at her. Gloria had been thorough, I'd give her that. She'd interviewed me 3 times, talked to Rowan twice, even drove out to check on us during my shifts. But how do you explain to a detective that someone disappeared because they violated a supernatural rule? How do you tell them about entities that visit a roadside diner in the middle of nowhere? "What about her car?" I asked. "Her purse?" Personal effects suggest she intended to return to work. But people walk away from their lives sometimes, especially after traumatic events. Gloria sipped her coffee and studied my face. "You mentioned she seemed stressed about working alone." That wasn't exactly what I'd said, but close enough. I'd told Gloria that Ethel was nervous about the Friday shift, which was true. I just hadn't mentioned why. "Any idea where she might have gone?" Gloria asked. I shook my head. Ethel had never talked much about family or friends outside work. She'd been focused on the diner, on understanding the visitors and their patterns. She'd known more about them than anyone except Rowan. And now all that knowledge was gone. "Well," Gloria closed the folder and stood up. "If she contacts you, give me a call. Sometimes people resurface after they've had time to sort things out." She left a $5 bill on the counter and walked out. I watched her drive away, then poured myself coffee and sat in the same spot where she'd been. The folder was gone, but the conversation lingered. People walk away from their lives sometimes. Maybe that's what the official report would say. Maybe that's what people would believe. But I knew better. Rowan came back from the hospital that same afternoon, looking like he'd lost 15 pounds and aged 5 years. His face was pale and drawn, and he moved carefully, like his chest still hurt. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the dining room. "She's really gone," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway. He walked over to the counter where Ethel's sandwich had been, where I'd found her purse. His fingers drummed against the surface, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. "I should have closed the place," he said. "Should have locked the doors and kept everyone home. She wouldn't have listened. You know how she was about the overtime pay." "Yeah," he rubbed his forehead. 3 years she worked here, never had a problem with any of them, even handled Mr. Henley better than most. I remembered Ethel explaining about Mr. Henley during my first week, how she'd taught me to make his coffee just right and have the exact change ready. She'd made it seem routine, manageable, like the supernatural visitors were just another part of the job. "We need new people," Rowan said. We need new people," Rowan said. "Can't keep running this place with just the two of us." I thought about that. 2 people meant one of us would have to work the last Friday of every month alone. Rule number 4 existed for a reason, and we'd just seen what happened when someone violated it. "What about the rules?" I asked. Rowan was quiet for a minute. He walked over to the coffee machine and poured himself a cup, added sugar and cream. His hands shook slightly as he stirred. "We'll train them right," he said finally. "Start them on day shifts, easy customers. Work up to the night work gradually. And if they don't believe you about the visitors, then they'll learn fast or they won't last long." He said it matter of fact, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. How many times had he done this? How many new employees had he hired and trained and watched quit or disappear over the years? Dawn Rice started on a Tuesday morning. 23 years old, blonde hair, bright smile. She'd worked at a diner in Billings before moving out here with her boyfriend. Rowan gave her the standard orientation, showed her how to work the register and coffee machine, explained the basic routine. I was getting ready to leave after my night shift when I heard him start talking about the rules. "Now, we get some unusual customers out here," he said. "Isolated location, you know. People driving long distances, sometimes they're not quite right." Dawn nodded, wiping down the counter with enthusiasm. "Sure, I've dealt with difficult customers before. These aren't difficult. They're dangerous." Rowan's voice got serious. "I'm going to give you a list of rules. They're not suggestions. They're not guidelines. They're survival instructions." I watched her face change as he explained about Mr. Henley, about the man with deer eyes, about the woman in blue dress. Her smile faded. Her movements slowed. By the time he got to rule number 5 about ignoring children after midnight, she was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Dead serious. But that's..." She looked around the dining room, taking in the normal tables and chairs, the ordinary coffee machine, the regular-looking pie case. "That's crazy. Crazy or not, it'll keep you alive." Dawn lasted exactly 1 shift. She came in Thursday evening for her first night training. I was supposed to work with her, show her the ropes, help her understand how things worked after dark. Everything went fine for the first few hours. We served coffee to a trucker heading to Denver, made sandwiches for a family driving through to Spokane, handled the dinner rush without any problems. Then, around 10:30, Mr. Henley showed up. I saw him through the front windows first, tall figure in the dark suit walking across the gravel lot. I'd been expecting him, Tuesday and Friday nights, always around the same time, like clockwork. "Dawn," I said quietly. "Remember what Rowan told you about the old man with translucent skin?" She looked up from restocking napkin dispensers. "The one who orders black coffee? That's him, coming through the door right now." The door chime rang and Mr. Henley stepped inside. Same expensive suit, same white hair, same pale skin that showed the blue veins underneath. He walked to his usual spot at the counter, 3 stools down from the register. Dawn stared at him. I could see her taking in the translucent skin, the pointed teeth when he smiled, the way his presence seemed to make the air colder. Her face went completely white. "Coffee," Mr. Henley said in his soft, precise voice. "Black." I moved toward the coffee machine, but Dawn was frozen in place. She stood there gripping the napkin dispenser, mouth slightly open, eyes wide with terror. "Dawn," I said under my breath. "The coffee." She didn't move. Mr. Henley turned his head toward her, and I saw his smile widen slightly. Those pointed teeth caught the fluorescent light. "Is there a problem?" he asked. His voice was still soft, still polite, but there was something underneath it now, something that made my skin crawl. I'd served him dozens of times over 8 months, always followed rule number 1 exactly. Always acknowledged him, always been respectful. Never had any trouble. But Dawn wasn't following the rules. Dawn. I said her name louder this time. "The coffee. Now." She blinked and seemed to snap out of it. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the coffee pot, and I watched her pour the cup. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar. She set it in front of Mr. Henley and stepped back quickly. $1.50, she whispered. Mr. Henley reached into his jacket and pulled out exact change. Same as always. He placed the coins on the counter in a neat line, lifted the cup to his lips, and drank slowly. Dawn backed away until she hit the kitchen door. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. Mr. Henley finished his coffee, set the cup down gently, and stood up. "Thank you," he said, looking directly at Dawn. "I hope to see you again soon." Then he walked out, same as he always did. Calm, unhurried, like nothing had happened. Dawn lasted about 30 seconds after the door closed behind him. "I quit," she said. Her voice was high and tight. "I quit right now. I'm not doing this." She untied her apron, threw it on the counter, and grabbed her purse from under the register. I tried to talk to her, tried to explain that she'd done fine, that following the rules made it safe, but she wasn't listening. "That thing isn't human," she said. "That's not a person. I don't know what it is, but I'm not serving coffee to it." She left through the back door and drove off in her little Honda. Never came back for her final paycheck. Easton Willis started the following Monday. 31 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, quiet and analytical. He'd been laid off from an accounting firm in Helena and needed work while he looked for something in his field. Rowan went through the same orientation, the same explanation about the rules. Easton listened carefully, asked a few questions about specifics, and nodded thoughtfully when Rowan finished. "I understand you're trying to prepare me for unusual situations," he said. "I appreciate the thoroughness of the training." I could tell he didn't believe a word of it. He thought Rowan was testing him somehow, or maybe preparing him for difficult customers who might be mentally ill or under the influence. He was trying to be professional about it, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Easton made it through 3 quiet shifts without incident. He was good with the routine work, efficient with customers, kept the place clean and organized. I started thinking maybe we'd found someone who could handle the job. Then Wednesday night brought a storm. I'd been watching the weather all evening, seeing the clouds build up in the west. The wind picked up around 11, rattling the windows and sending tumbleweeds across the parking lot. By midnight, we were getting real rain, the kind that comes down in sheets and turns the gravel lot into a muddy mess. Easton was wiping down tables when I saw the figure walking across the lot. Tall, heavy coat, moving slowly through the rain. My stomach dropped. "Easton," I said. "Back room, now." He looked up from the table. "What?" "Rule number 2, the man with deer eyes. Go to the back room and don't come out until I tell you." He followed my gaze to the front windows, saw the figure approaching the door. "That's just someone seeking shelter from the storm. Look at his face when he gets to the door. Then tell me it's just someone." The figure reached the entrance and stopped under the small overhang. Lightning flashed, illuminating his features for just a moment. Large, round, brown deer eyes in an otherwise human face. Easton went rigid. I could see his mind trying to process what he was seeing, trying to find a logical explanation. The analytical part of his brain was working overtime, and it wasn't coming up with any answers that made sense. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Back room. Now." But Easton couldn't move. He stood there staring at the deer-eyed man, his face pale behind his glasses. The man tried the door handle, found it unlocked, and stepped inside. The door chime seemed louder than usual, more ominous. The deer-eyed man stood just inside the entrance, water dripping from his coat onto the floor. Those large brown eyes scanned the dining room, taking in the tables, the counter, and finally settling on Easton. I grabbed Easton's arm and tried to pull him toward the kitchen, but he resisted. He was staring at the visitor like he was trying to solve a puzzle, like he could figure out the logical explanation if he just looked hard enough. "Sir," Easton said, "can I help you?" The deer-eyed man tilted his head slightly. When he spoke, his voice had an odd quality, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "You're new," he said. "Yes, sir. First week on the job." I was pulling harder on Easton's arm now, but he was bigger than me and he wasn't cooperating. He was still trying to process what he was seeing, still looking for rational explanations. The deer-eyed man started walking toward the counter. His footsteps echoed strangely, like the dining room was much larger than it actually was. The temperature began to drop. "Easton," I hissed. "We need to go, right now." But it was too late. The deer-eyed man had reached the counter, and Easton was still standing there, still staring, still trying to make sense of something that couldn't be understood logically. The man reached out with one pale hand and touched Easton's shoulder. Easton screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was high and thin and went on far longer than any human voice should be able to sustain. His eyes rolled back and his whole body convulsed, like he was having some kind of seizure. Then he ran. He bolted toward the front door, pushing past the deer-eyed man, stumbling into tables and chairs. He made it outside and kept running, out into the storm toward the road. I could see him through the windows, running down the highway in the rain, still screaming. The deer-eyed man watched him go. Then he turned back to me, those large brown eyes unblinking. "Where is your hiding place?" he asked. I didn't answer. I backed toward the kitchen, moving slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. The deer-eyed man didn't follow. He just stood there at the counter watching me retreat. "Next time," he said, "hide faster." Then he turned and walked back out into the storm. I found Easton's car keys and wallet under the register. His glasses were on the floor by the front door, one lens cracked. I never saw him again. So that left me and Rowan. 2 people to run a 24-hour diner. 2 people to cover 7 days a week, day and night shifts with no backup when one of us got sick or needed time off. And Friday was coming again, the last Friday of the month. I'd been working 6 nights a week since Ethel disappeared, pulling 12-hour shifts, going home exhausted and coming back tired. Rowan handled the day shifts, but he was still recovering from pneumonia, moving slower than usual, coughing when he thought I wasn't listening. We both knew what Friday meant. We both knew rule number 4, and we both knew we didn't have enough people to follow it safely. "I'll close early again," Rowan said when we talked about the schedule. "Lock up at 10, same as last time." But I'd been thinking about that. About Ethel working until 10 and disappearing anyway. About how the rules might not be as simple as we thought. "What if 10 isn't early enough?" I asked. Rowan didn't have an answer for that. He just looked tired and old and worn down by years of losing employees to things that couldn't be explained or reported or stopped. I'd learned their patterns over the past few months. Mr. Henley came every Tuesday and Friday at 10:30, regular as clockwork. The deer-eyed man showed up during storms, unpredictable but always after midnight. The woman in blue dress hadn't returned since Brian's encounter, but Rowan said she appeared every couple of years. And there were others. Visitors I hadn't met yet. Entities that followed rules I didn't understand. The child after midnight was just one of them. Ethel had known about more, had 3 years of experience with the supernatural ecosystem that surrounded this place. Now all that knowledge was gone, and I was learning through trial and error, memorizing schedules, watching for patterns, trying to anticipate when they'd arrive and how to handle them safely. It was wearing on me. The constant vigilance, the isolation, the knowledge that one mistake could make me disappear without a trace. I'd wake up thinking about the rules, go to sleep reviewing them in my head. Every door chime made my heart race. Every unusual customer made me wonder if they were human. But I needed this job. And more than that, I'd grown protective of the place. Someone had to keep the diner running, had to maintain the strange balance between the human world and whatever existed alongside it. Someone had to serve coffee to Mr. Henley and hide from the deer-eyed man and follow the rules that kept everyone safe. Rowan was getting older. He couldn't do this forever. Eventually, it would be just me, the only person left who understood how things worked, the only one willing to stay and keep the ecosystem functioning. The diner felt different now without Ethel and Brian. Quieter, more fragile, like something important had been removed and left a hole that couldn't be filled. But I was still here, still following the rules, still keeping the place running one shift at a time. I was counting coffee filters for the third time when Mr. Henley walked through the front door. The bell chimed soft and familiar, and I looked up from my clipboard to see him moving across the linoleum in that careful way of his. Always the same dark suit, always that translucent skin that showed the blue veins underneath. I'd gotten used to him over the months, but seeing him still made something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear exactly. More like recognition that the night had shifted into something different. "Evening, Mr. Henley," I said, setting down my pen. "Coffee?" He nodded and took his usual spot at the counter, 3 stools down from where I'd been working, his hands folded on the surface, and I could see the network of veins running under the pale skin like ink under paper. I grabbed the coffee pot and a clean mug, poured it black the way he always took it. $1.50, I said, though we both knew he'd have exact change. He reached into his jacket pocket with those long fingers and placed the coins on the counter. A $1 bill, 2 quarters, always the same. I scooped them up and hit the register keys, the drawer sliding open with its familiar ding. Mr. Henley lifted the mug to his lips and drank slowly. I went back to my inventory, trying to focus on the numbers. Coffee filters, check. Sugar packets, running low again. Napkins, plenty. The routine helped keep my mind steady when he was here. Rowan had told me once that Mr. Henley had been coming to the diner for years, long before I started working here. Always polite, always quiet, always left without any trouble. I was writing down the ketchup bottle count when I heard the voice. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My pen stopped moving. The voice was small, high-pitched. A child's voice coming from somewhere near the front entrance. I didn't look up from my clipboard, but my whole body went tense. Rule number 5. If a child comes after midnight, ignore them completely. "I need help," the voice said, closer now. "I can't find my mom." I kept my eyes on the inventory sheet and wrote down the mustard count. 3 bottles, all half full. My handwriting looked shakier than usual, but I kept the pen moving. Mr. Henley was still drinking his coffee, but I noticed his movements had slowed. He was listening too. "Please, mister, I'm lost." The voice was right behind me now, maybe 6 feet away. I could hear small footsteps on the linoleum, the soft squeak of sneakers. I forced myself to move on to the next item, dish soap under the sink. I bent down and counted the bottles, my hands steady even though my heart was beating faster. When I straightened up, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, something small and dark by the front windows. I didn't turn to look. Rule number 5 was clear. Ignore them completely. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, no help. I'd followed it before and survived. I'd follow it again. "Why won't you look at me?" The child's voice had an edge to it now, frustrated and getting louder. I wrote down the soap count and moved on to paper towels. Mr. Henley set his mug down on the counter with a soft clink, but he didn't drink. He was sitting very still, his pale hands motionless on the surface. That's when I saw the movement outside. Through the front windows, past the reflection of the dining room lights, something tall was walking across the gravel parking lot, a figure in a heavy coat, moving slow and deliberate toward the entrance. Even from this distance, even in the dim light from the diner's sign, I could tell it was big. 6 feet tall, maybe more. My stomach dropped. I knew that walk, that careful approach. The man with deer eyes. Rule number 2. But I couldn't go to the back room. Mr. Henley was still here, still drinking his coffee. And the child was somewhere behind me, still calling for help. I'd never had multiple visitors before. The rules didn't say what to do when more than one showed up at the same time. The figure outside was getting closer. I could make out more details now. The heavy coat, the way it moved without hurrying but never stopping. In maybe 30 seconds, it would reach the front door. And I'd be trapped here with Mr. Henley at the counter and the child somewhere in the dining room. "I'm scared," the child's voice said. And now it had that echo quality I remembered from before, like it was coming from underground or from multiple directions at once. "Please help me." I gripped my pen tighter and wrote down the paper towel count. My handwriting was getting messy, but I kept going. Glass cleaner, half empty. Sanitizer spray, nearly full. The routine was all I had to hold on to. Mr. Henley turned on his stool. It was the first time I'd ever seen him move that way, sudden and deliberate. He was looking toward the front windows, and his pale face had changed. The expression was still calm, but there was something else there. Something that looked almost like concern. The footsteps outside had reached the gravel right in front of the entrance. Heavy boots on stone, slow and measured. Any second now, the door would open, and the man with deer eyes would walk in. I'd have to choose between the rules. Hide in the back and leave Mr. Henley alone with whatever that thing was, or stay here and hope Mr. Henley's presence would somehow protect me. "Mister, please," the child's voice said, and now it was definitely coming from multiple directions. The echo was getting stronger, like the words were bouncing off walls that weren't there. "I just want to go home." Mr. Henley stood up. He moved with that same careful precision he always had, but faster than I'd ever seen him move before. His translucent skin seemed to glow slightly in the diner's fluorescent light, and when he turned toward the front entrance, I saw his face in profile. The features were sharper than I'd noticed before, more angular, and his eyes were focused on something outside with an intensity that made the air in the room feel charged. The door handle turned. I watched it from the corner of my eye, still pretending to focus on my inventory. The metal handle moved down with a soft click, and the door swung open. The bell chimed, but the sound was different somehow. Flatter, like the air had gotten thicker. The man with deer eyes stepped inside. He was exactly as I remembered from that night weeks ago. Tall, broad shoulders, heavy coat that looked expensive. But it was the eyes that made my whole body go cold. Large and brown and round, sitting in a human face like they'd been transplanted there from something that lived in the woods. They moved with that animal awareness, scanning the room, taking in everything. His gaze landed on Mr. Henley first. Then it shifted to me, still bent over my clipboard. Then toward wherever the child was standing. I could feel those deer eyes moving between us, calculating something. "Busy night," the man said. His voice was deep and calm, like he was commenting on the weather. Mr. Henley didn't respond. He was standing next to his stool, maybe 4 feet from the entrance, positioned between the deer-eyed man and the rest of the dining room. His pale hands were at his sides, and I noticed his fingers were longer than they should be. Thin and white, with nails that looked sharp in the fluorescent light. "I don't usually have company," the deer-eyed man continued. He took a step further into the diner, and I heard the child's voice get louder behind me. "Help me. Please help me. Why won't anyone help me?" The words were stretching now, the vowels pulling out longer than any human breath could sustain. The echo was getting stronger too, like the child was calling from the bottom of a well that kept getting deeper. Mr. Henley moved. He didn't walk toward the deer-eyed man. Instead, he stepped sideways, putting himself directly in front of the entrance, blocking the path. His translucent skin was definitely glowing now, a soft blue-white light that made the veins underneath look like electric wires. "You should leave," Mr. Henley said. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Still quiet, still polite, but with something underneath that made the coffee mug on the counter vibrate slightly. The deer-eyed man tilted his head, studying Mr. Henley with those round brown eyes. "Should I?" the deer-eyed man asked. Behind me, the child's voice was getting distorted beyond recognition. The words were breaking apart, becoming sounds that hurt to hear. I kept writing on my clipboard, my pen moving across the paper in shaky lines. Toilet paper needs restocking. Hand soap dispensers working fine. The routine was the only thing keeping me sane. Mr. Henley took another step toward the entrance. The glow around his skin was getting brighter, and now I could see that his teeth were pointed. Not just the canines, but all of them, sharp and white like a shark's mouth. "The boy follows the rules," Mr. Henley said, and I realized he was talking about me. "He shows proper respect. He doesn't interfere." The deer-eyed man looked at me again, those animal eyes studying my face. I kept my gaze fixed on the inventory sheet, but I could feel his attention like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. "The rules," the deer-eyed man repeated. "Yes, I suppose he does follow them most of the time." "Always," Mr. Henley corrected. He acknowledged me properly. He ignores the child. He would have hidden from you, if circumstances allowed. I wrote down the count for coffee stirrers, my hand shaking so badly the numbers were barely legible. The child's voice behind me had become something that wasn't words anymore, just sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The temperature in the diner was dropping, and I could see my breath starting to fog. The deer-eyed man took another step forward. Mr. Henley moved to block him again, and now they were maybe 3 feet apart. The glow around Mr. Henley's skin was bright enough to cast shadows on the walls, and the vibration in the air was making the coffee pot rattle on its burner. "He's under protection," Mr. Henley said. "Is he?" the deer-eyed man asked. "That's interesting." They stared at each other for a long moment. I could feel the tension building between them, like the air before a thunderstorm. The child's voice was getting so distorted it was making my ears hurt, and the cold was seeping through my shirt. But I kept writing, kept following the rules, kept pretending I was just doing inventory in an empty diner. Then the deer-eyed man smiled. It wasn't a human expression. The lips pulled back too far, showing too many teeth, and the eyes stayed completely animal. He looked at Mr. Henley, then at me, then back to Mr. Henley. "Another time, perhaps," he said. He turned and walked back toward the entrance. Mr. Henley didn't move out of the way, so the deer-eyed man had to step around him. As he passed, he leaned down slightly and said something in Mr. Henley's ear. I couldn't hear the words, but Mr. Henley's glow flickered for a moment. The deer-eyed man reached the door and paused with his hand on the handle. He looked back at me one more time, those round brown eyes studying my face. "Keep following the rules, boy," he said. "They're the only thing keeping you alive." Then he was gone. The door swung shut behind him, the bell chimed, and the pressure in the air lifted all at once. The child's voice cut off mid-sound, leaving sudden, complete silence. Mr. Henley stood by the entrance for another moment, his glow fading back to the usual translucent pale. Then he walked back to his stool and sat down. He picked up his coffee mug and took a sip, like nothing had happened. I finished writing down the coffee stirrer count and moved on to the next item. My hands were still shaking, but the routine was helping me stay grounded. Salt and pepper shakers all full. Sugar dispensers, half empty. "Thank you," I said quietly, not looking up from my clipboard. Mr. Henley finished his coffee and set the mug down on the counter. He stood up, smoothed his dark jacket, and walked toward the entrance. At the door, he paused and looked back at me. "The rules exist for good reasons," he said. "Remember that." Then he was gone too, disappearing into the night like he always did. I was alone in the diner again, with my inventory sheet and my pen and the memory of what had just happened. I looked around the dining room. Everything was normal. Tables and chairs in their proper places, coffee pots warming on their burners, the register closed and locked. No sign that anything unusual had occurred. But I knew better now. The rules weren't just about surviving individual encounters. They were about something bigger, something more complicated than I'd understood. Mr. Henley had protected me tonight, had put himself between me and the deer-eyed man because I'd followed the rules properly. I finished my inventory and clipped the sheet to the clipboard. Whatever was happening in this place, whatever these things were that came in the night, I was part of it now, and as long as I kept following the rules, I might just make it through. I stayed at the counter for another hour after Mr. Henley left, finishing the inventory even though my hands kept shaking every time I wrote something down. The coffee filters, sugar packets, napkins, all of it seemed so normal after what had just happened. But normal was what I needed right then, something I could count and check off and understand. The rest of the night passed quietly. A trucker came in around 4:30, ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie, left a decent tip. Then a family heading to Billings stopped for breakfast around 6. The dad looked tired, the mom kept checking her phone, and their 2 kids argued over who got the window seat. Regular people with regular problems. I poured coffee, took orders, cleaned tables, everything I'd been doing for 8 months. But something had changed during that encounter with Mr. Henley and the deer-eyed man. I couldn't stop thinking about what Mr. Henley had said, that I was under protection because I followed the rules, and the way he'd stood between me and the deer-eyed man, his skin glowing like that. Whatever Mr. Henley was, he wasn't just another customer. He was something else entirely, something that had decided I was worth protecting. The sounds started around 20 minutes after Mr. Henley and the deer-eyed man had their standoff. I was wiping down the coffee machine when I heard the first crash outside. Not from the parking lot, from somewhere around the building. Then another crash, followed by a scraping sound like claws on metal. I moved to the front windows and looked out, but the parking lot was empty except for the trucker's rig and my Honda. The sounds were coming from the sides of the building, maybe the back. Deep, grinding noises like something was being torn apart. Then a sound I'd never heard before. A high, keening wail that made my teeth ache. The lights flickered. Not the usual flicker from the old wiring, but something different. They dimmed and brightened in a rhythm, like a heartbeat. The coffee machine made a grinding noise and shut itself off. Even the refrigerator in the kitchen went quiet. I stayed at the windows, gripping the edge of the counter. Whatever was happening out there, I wasn't going outside to check. The rules didn't cover this situation, but common sense did. Stay inside, keep the doors locked, wait it out. The scraping sounds got louder. Something was moving around the entire building, circling it. I could track the progress by the noise, starting at the front corner, moving along the east wall toward the back, then around to the west side. Whatever it was big, and it was taking its time. Then came a sound that made my blood freeze. A voice, but not human. Deep and resonant, speaking words I couldn't understand. The language sounded old, like something from before English existed. The voice was angry, frustrated, and it was getting closer to the front of the building. I backed away from the windows and moved to the center of the dining room. The lights were still flickering in that strange rhythm, and now I could hear something else underneath the voice. A humming sound, like electricity building up before a storm. The voice stopped. Everything went quiet. I waited, counting my heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet from before. This was the kind of silence that meant something was listening, waiting. Then the lights went out completely. I stood in the dark dining room, not moving, barely breathing. The emergency lighting should have kicked in, but it didn't. The only light came from the trucker's rig in the parking lot, casting long shadows through the windows. I could see the shapes of tables and chairs, but everything looked wrong in the dim light. Bigger, more threatening. A new sound started, a rhythmic tapping on the windows, not like fingers or knuckles, more like claws. Tap, 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 moving from window to window around the front of the building, testing them maybe, or trying to get my attention. I didn't move toward the windows. I stayed in the center of the dining room, hands at my sides, waiting. The tapping continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then it stopped. The lights came back on all at once, bright and normal. The coffee machine hummed back to life. The refrigerator started its usual rattle. Everything returned to the way it had been, like nothing had happened. But I knew something had happened, something big. I walked to the front windows and looked out at the parking lot, still empty except for the vehicles. No sign of whatever had been circling the building, no evidence of the sounds I'd heard. But I could feel it, a change in the air, like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. The trucker came back in around 5, paid his check, and left without mentioning anything unusual. If he'd heard the sounds, he didn't show it. Maybe the whole thing had been contained to the building itself, or maybe truckers had learned not to ask questions about strange noises at roadside diners in the middle of nowhere. When Rowan arrived for the day shift, I was sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee, trying to decide what to tell him. He took one look at me and knew something had happened. "You look like hell," he said, hanging his coat on the hook by the kitchen door. "Rough night." "Mr. Henley came in," I said, "around midnight." Rowan nodded. That wasn't unusual. Mr. Henley kept to his Tuesday and Friday schedule. "But he wasn't alone," I continued. "The deer-eyed man showed up, and there was a child." Rowan went very still. "All three? At the same time?" "Mr. Henley, he protected me, stood between me and the deer-eyed man. Told him I was under protection because I follow the rules." Rowan sat down on the stool next to me. "That's never happened before, not in all the years I've been here." I told him about the confrontation, about Mr. Henley's skin glowing and the way the deer-eyed man had backed down. Then I told him about the sounds afterward, the circling, the scraping, the voice speaking in that unknown language. Rowan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "We need to check the outside of the building," he said finally. We went out through the back door. It didn't take long to find the damage. Deep gouges in the metal siding, like something with claws had tried to tear through the walls. The marks went all the way around the building, about 7 feet off the ground. Some of them were so deep I could see the insulation underneath. "Jesus," Rowan whispered, running his fingers along one of the gouges. "Look at this!" But the gouges weren't the worst of it. In the parking lot, scattered around the building like someone had thrown them from a great height, were the bodies of ravens, dozens of them, all dead, their black feathers spread across the gravel. I'd seen dead birds before. They hit the windows sometimes or got caught in storms. But this was different. These ravens looked like they'd been drained of something essential. Their eyes were white, empty. Their beaks hung open, and they were arranged in a rough circle around the building like they'd been placed there deliberately. "This is bad," Rowan said, standing in the middle of the circle of dead birds. "This is really bad." We spent the morning cleaning up. Rowan got a shovel from the storage shed and we gathered the ravens into garbage bags. There were 43 of them. I counted as we worked. 43 dead birds that hadn't been there when I'd arrived for my shift. The gouges in the walls were harder to deal with. Rowan said he'd call someone about getting them repaired, but I could tell he was shaken. In all his years running the diner, he'd never seen damage like this. "Mr. Henley saved your life last night," he said as we finished cleaning up the last of the feathers. Whatever happened after he left, it would have been worse if he hadn't been there. I thought about that as I drove home. Mr. Henley, with his translucent skin and pointed teeth, had put himself between me and something dangerous. Had protected me because I'd followed the rules, shown him respect, served his coffee without question for 8 months. But protection came with a cost. I was beginning to understand that. The dead ravens, the gouges in the walls. That was the price of keeping me safe. And I had a feeling Mr. Henley had paid an even higher price than that. When I came in for my next shift, I waited for him. Tuesday night, 2:17 in the morning, his usual time. But he didn't show up. The front door stayed closed. The parking lot stayed empty. For the first time in 8 months, Mr. Henley missed his appointment. He didn't come Friday night either, or the Tuesday after that. I never saw him again. I'd been working at Jerry's truck stop for 6 months now, and I still wasn't used to how quiet my brain could be during a shift. No rules to remember. No watching the parking lot for figures in heavy coats. No listening for children's voices after midnight or worrying about women in blue dresses. Just coffee. Regular coffee for regular people who cast normal shadows and whose eyes belonged to whatever species they'd been born as. The work wasn't complicated. Pour coffee, take orders, ring up purchases, restock the hot food under the warming lights. Jerry kept the place running 24 hours. But it wasn't like Rowan's place. This was right off Interstate 90, 10 minutes from downtown. State troopers stopped by every few hours. Truckers pulled in constantly. Even at 3 in the morning, you'd get families driving through, college kids heading home, shift workers grabbing coffee before early jobs, normal people doing normal things. I was wiping down the counter when a trucker came in, boots heavy on the linoleum, baseball cap pulled low. Big guy, maybe 50, with grease under his fingernails and the tired look of someone who'd been driving all night. "Coffee," he said, settling onto one of the stools. I poured from the pot I'd made 20 minutes earlier. Fresh, but not the careful timing I used to do at Rowan's. Here, if the coffee was an hour old, nobody complained. If it was 2 hours old, I'd make a new pot. Simple as that. The trucker wrapped his hands around the mug and took a sip. "Thanks." "Sure thing." He had normal eyes, brown, tired, human. When he blinked, his eyelids moved like eyelids were supposed to move. When he spoke, his voice came from one direction, at one volume, without any echo or distortion. I'd been noticing things like that for 6 months now. How people's voices sounded like voices. How their skin looked like skin instead of something you could see through. How they paid with crumpled bills and loose change instead of exact change counted out with fingers that were too long. The trucker finished his coffee, left $2 on the counter, and headed back to his rig. Through the windows, I watched him do his pre-trip inspection, checking tires, testing lights, normal stuff. He climbed into the cab and pulled out onto the interstate, taillights disappearing into the darkness. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter. Jerry's had a radio that played classic rock all night, volume low enough that you could ignore it if you wanted. Right now, it was playing something from the 80s, guitar and drums that filled the space between customers. At Rowan's, the quiet had been different. Heavy. Like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something to walk through the door. Here, quiet just meant business was slow. My phone buzzed. Text message from my landlord about rent being due next week. Normal stuff, normal problems. I typed back that I'd drop off the check Tuesday, hit send, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to focus on something that simple. Rent, groceries, whether my car needed an oil change. At Rowan's, your brain stayed locked on the rules, always ready, always watching. Even during the slow hours, you knew that any sound could mean something was coming. The door chimed and a woman came in, maybe 40, wearing scrubs. Nurse, probably, getting off a late shift at the hospital. "Coffee to go," she said, large. I grabbed a large cup, filled it, snapped on a lid. $2.50, She handed me $3, told me to keep the change, and left. Normal transaction. Normal person. Normal night. But sometimes, when it got really quiet like this, my mind would drift back to that last night at Rowan's. Mr. Henley standing up from his stool, his skin starting to glow that blue-white color. The way he'd positioned himself between me and the deer-eyed man. The way his voice had changed when he said I was under protection. I'd been thinking about that a lot lately. Whether Mr. Henley had known what was going to happen, whether he'd made some kind of choice that night, deciding to protect me instead of just sitting there drinking his coffee like usual. The way he'd looked at me when I thanked him. Not like someone who'd done a favor. More like someone who'd just paid a bill he'd been carrying for a long time. And then he'd never come back. I'd driven past Rowan's a few times over the past 6 months. Not stopping, just checking. The lights were always on, cars in the parking lot. Aurora Rivera had bought the place from Patterson, and it looked like she was keeping it running. I wondered if Rowan had given her the rules, if she'd believed them, if she'd hired people who could follow them. I hoped so. The rules worked. I'd followed them for 8 months, and they'd kept me alive. Even when 3 different entities showed up in the same night, the rules had been enough. Well, the rules and Mr. Henley's protection. The coffee pot gurgled as it finished brewing a fresh batch. I switched out the old pot, poured the stale coffee down the drain, rinsed the carafe. Simple maintenance. No ritual to it, no careful timing, just making sure the coffee was decent. At Jerry's, the strangest thing that happened was truckers complaining about the bathroom being out of paper towels or college kids trying to buy beer without ID. Problems you could solve with common sense. Problems that stayed solved. I'd been sleeping better too. 8 solid hours most days instead of the restless half-sleep I'd gotten used to at Rowan's. No dreams about translucent skin or deer eyes or children's voices calling from empty rooms. Just normal sleep. The kind where you woke up feeling rested instead of like you'd been standing guard all night. The radio shifted to a commercial for a car dealership in Billings. I'd grown up in Billings, back before I'd made the decisions that drove me out to Highway 87 in the first place. Seemed like a different life now, different person. Working at Rowan's had changed something in me. Made me more careful, maybe. More aware of how much I didn't know about the world. Before that job, I'd thought weird meant difficult customers or equipment that broke down at the wrong time. Now I knew weird could mean things that shouldn't exist, following rules that kept you breathing. But it had also taught me to appreciate normal, really appreciate it. The weight of a regular conversation with a regular person. The simple pleasure of going through a whole shift without checking over your shoulder or listening for sounds that didn't belong. Another trucker came in, different from the first one. Younger, cleaner, with the kind of energy that said he was just starting his route instead of finishing it. "Coffee and a sandwich," he said, pointing at the pre-made sandwiches in the cooler. "Which one?" "Turkey and Swiss." I rang him up, made change from a 20. He sat at one of the small tables by the window, unwrapped his sandwich, and started eating while checking his phone. Probably looking at his route, or texting his dispatcher, or just killing time before getting back on the road. Normal stuff. The kind of stuff I'd forgotten to notice back when I was worried about entities that could drain the life out of ravens or leave claw marks 7 feet up on metal siding. The trucker finished his meal, threw away his trash, and headed out. I watched him walk to his truck, a big Peterbilt with sleeper cab and refrigerated trailer. He did his inspection, climbed up into the cab, and pulled out onto the interstate. I was alone again, but it felt different than being alone at Rowan's. Peaceful instead of tense. Like the building was just a building instead of some kind of way station for things that shouldn't exist. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my sister in Missoula asking if I wanted to come up for her birthday next month. Normal family stuff. The kind of invitation I could actually consider now, instead of worrying about missing shifts or leaving Rowan short-handed during dangerous times. I typed back that I'd check my schedule and let her know. Hit send. Slipped the phone away. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to make plans like that. At Rowan's, you didn't take time off during the last week of the month. You didn't leave your coworkers alone with the rules. You showed up, followed the instructions, and hoped that was enough. Here, if I wanted a weekend off, Jerry would cover my shifts or call in one of the part-time people. Simple as that. No life or death consequences. No supernatural entities that might show up while I was gone. The door chimed again. This time it was a state trooper. Tall guy with the kind of steady presence that came from years of dealing with whatever the interstate threw at him. "Evening," he said. "Coffee?" "Please. Large. Black." I poured his coffee, handed it over. He left $3 on the counter, took a sip, and nodded approval. "Quiet night?" he asked. "Pretty much. Few truckers, but nothing unusual." Nothing unusual. I'd been using that phrase a lot lately, and every time I said it, I felt a little grateful. Unusual, at Jerry's, meant a drunk customer or someone trying to steal merchandise. Problems you could handle by calling the police or asking someone to leave. The trooper finished his coffee, said thanks, and headed back to his patrol car. I watched him pull out onto the interstate, probably heading to his next patrol area or responding to a call. Normal law enforcement dealing with normal problems, not disappearances that left no evidence, or employees who ran screaming into storms and never came back. I refilled the coffee pot, wiped down the counter again, checked the hot food under the warming lights. Everything running smooth, everything normal. But sometimes in the quiet moments like this, I'd find myself thinking about Mr. Henley, about the way he'd stood up that night, positioning himself between me and the deer-eyed man, about how his protection had cost him something, judging by the claw marks and dead ravens we'd found the next morning, about how he'd never come back to the diner after that. I'd started to wonder if he'd known that would be his last visit, if he'd made some kind of choice, trading his regular Tuesday and Friday coffee for keeping me safe, if that's what protection meant in whatever world he came from. The thought bothered me more than I wanted to admit, that someone, something, had paid a price for my safety, and I'd never even known his real name. Just Mr. Henley, the polite customer who drank black coffee and left exact change. I'd survived by following the rules, but Mr. Henley had made sure I got the chance to follow them. And whatever had happened to him afterward, I was here at Jerry's, pouring coffee for normal people and sleeping through normal nights. That had to count for something. The radio played another song, something slow and easy that matched the quiet mood of the truck stop. I leaned against the counter and watched the interstate through the windows, headlights and taillights moving in both directions, people going places, living their lives, dealing with normal problems and normal joys. I was one of them now. Just another guy working a night shift, earning a paycheck, paying rent. No rules to follow except showing up on time and keeping the coffee fresh. It was enough, more than enough.